A powerful billionaire CEO gave her 24 hours. Marry him, or he destroys her family. She thought it was cruelty, until she learned the truth. She's a devoted daughter from a proud family business. He's a cold, unstoppable tycoon with unlimited power. And this forced marriage isn't about love, it's about revenge. Years ago, her family ruined a poor boy's life, and now that boy controls their future. As the wedding clock ticks down, shocking secrets rise to the surface. Her family is hiding something devastating, and the man threatening them may be more broken than evil. She must choose. Protect the people she loves, or tell the truth and lose everything. Because if she makes the wrong choice, this marriage won't just destroy her family, it could destroy his soul. So what would you do when love, truth, and revenge collide in just 24 hours? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The early morning sunlight filtered through the weathered windows of Moore Heritage Foods, casting warm streaks across the well-worn hardwood floors. Zoe Moore sat at her desk, her fingers moving steadily across the calculator as she reviewed the month's financial statements. The familiar scent of her grandmother's coffee brewing down the hall brought a smile to her face, even as she frowned at the numbers before her. The building itself told the story of their family's journey. From the original storefront her grandparents had opened in the 1960s to the modest but proud three-story brick building they now called home. While other food companies operated from gleaming steel and glass towers, Moore Heritage Foods remained rooted in the community that had supported them from the beginning. Zoe glanced up as footsteps approached, the particular shuffle step instantly recognizable. "Mama, you're here early again," she said, rising to help her mother with her coat. "Someone has to keep an eye on you workaholics," her mother replied with a warm smile, her silver-streaked hair neatly pinned back. "Your father's already in the test kitchen, tinkering with that new barbecue sauce recipe." "At 6:30 in the morning?" Zoe shook her head fondly. "Some things never change. And that's exactly how we like it," her mother said, patting Zoe's cheek before heading toward her own office. Settling back at her desk, Zoe returned to the spreadsheets. The numbers were solid. Not spectacular, but steady. 3 generations of careful management had kept them profitable even through tough times. Their soul food product line might be smaller than the corporate giants, but their reputation for quality and authenticity had earned them loyal customers across 5 states. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of phone calls, meetings, and production updates. Zoe had just finished reviewing the quarterly inventory when her computer pinged with an urgent email. Then another, and another. Her heart began to race as she opened them one by one. The first was from their primary supplier, informing them that their scheduled delivery was indefinitely delayed. The second came from their bank, noting that their line of credit needed immediate review. The third was from their largest distributor, citing technical issues that would prevent them from moving more heritage products. Zoe's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. 3 calls, and 15 minutes later, the pattern became clear. They were being systematically cut off. But why? And by whom? She walked quickly to her grandmother's office, finding Ruth Moore in her usual spot by the window, a Bible open on her desk beside stacks of paperwork. "Something's wrong, Gran," Zoe said, sinking into the familiar leather chair across from her grandmother's desk. She explained the situation, watching as her grandmother's expression grew grave. "The Lord gives us signs," Ruth said quietly, closing her Bible. "We must have the wisdom to read them." She looked at Zoe with knowing eyes. "Have you checked our competitors' recent acquisitions?" Zoe hadn't, but she did now, pulling up financial news on her tablet. The pieces started falling into place. 3 smaller food companies, all recently acquired by subsidiaries of Blackwell Global. Each acquisition followed a similar pattern of supply chain disruption and credit freezes. But why us? Zoe wondered aloud. We're not even in direct competition with their food divisions. The afternoon crawled by in a haze of increasingly worried phone calls and emergency meetings. Their warehouse manager reported that outgoing shipments were being rejected without explanation. Their bank representative spoke in circles about policy reviews and updated risk assessments. Even their most loyal distributors seemed suddenly hesitant to return calls. At 4:45 in the afternoon, Zoe's email pinged one final time. The message was brief. On letterhead she recognized from countless business news articles. Your presence is required at Blackwell Global headquarters this evening at 7 o'clock sharp. Top floor executive suite. This is not a request. Regards, Carter Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer, Blackwell Global. Zoe stared at the screen, her throat tight. Everyone in business knew about Carter Blackwell, the billionaire CEO whose mere signature on a document could make or break companies. His reputation for ruthless efficiency was legendary, matched only by his apparent disdain for public appearances or press interviews. I've got it! Her father's voice echoed from the test kitchen, followed by the clatter of pots. Any other day she would have rushed down to taste his latest creation. Instead, she printed the email with trembling hands and walked to her grandmother's office once more. Ruth Moore read the summons silently, then looked up at her granddaughter with steady eyes. Sometimes the storms come not to destroy us, but to clear our path, she said softly. Whatever this man wants, remember who you are and whose you are. Zoe nodded, drawing strength from her grandmother's unwavering faith. She returned to her office, where the last rays of sunset painted the family photos on her wall in shades of gold. There was her grandfather on opening day, proud in his chef's whites, her parents at their 20th anniversary celebration. Her brother. She touched his photo gently, missing his laugh, his wisdom. Looking out her window at the city skyline, she could see the Blackwell Global Tower dominating the horizon, 90 stories of steel and glass reaching into the darkening sky. Whatever game Carter Blackwell was playing, she would face it head-on. 3 generations of Moore strength ran through her veins. She wouldn't let them down. Zoe gathered her things, tucking the company's latest financial reports into her briefcase, alongside the family recipe book she always carried for luck. She couldn't know what waited in that top-floor office, but she would meet it with the grace her grandmother had taught her and the determination her parents had instilled. Heading out early? Her mother called as Zoe passed her office. Meeting downtown? Zoe replied, keeping her voice steady. No need to worry them until she knew more. Don't wait dinner on me. The late afternoon traffic hummed outside as Zoe stepped onto the sidewalk, the weight of generations resting on her shoulders. Behind her stood the brick building that housed their family's dreams and legacy. Ahead loomed the Blackwell Tower, its windows already lighting up against the approaching night. Somewhere on the 90th floor, Carter Blackwell waited, and with him, perhaps, the answers to why their world had suddenly started crumbling. The security guard at Blackwell Global barely glanced at Zoe's ID before waving her through the gleaming lobby. The elevator seemed to rise forever, smooth and silent, each floor bringing her closer to whatever awaited on the 90th floor. The numbers ticked upward. 87, 88, 89. When the doors opened, Zoe stepped into a world of stark minimalism. Black marble floors stretched beneath her feet, while floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawling below, like a glittering carpet. The reception area stood empty, but soft lighting guided her path down a long hallway toward double doors of frosted glass. Before she could knock, a voice called out, "Enter!" Carter Blackwell's office was larger than her family's entire executive floor. 3 walls of glass created the illusion of floating above the city, while strategic lighting cast the room in shadows and sharp angles. Behind a massive desk of black glass sat Carter Blackwell himself. He didn't rise to greet her. He didn't even look up from the document he was reading. In person, he was exactly as the rare photographs showed. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car, with dark hair swept back from features that seemed carved from marble. Hard, unyielding. "Miss Moore." His voice was cool, precise. "You're 3 minutes early. Commendable." Zoe straightened her spine. "Mr. Blackwell, would you care to explain why you've orchestrated a complete blockade of my family's business?" Now he looked up, and Zoe felt the full force of those steel-grey eyes. Direct, also commendable. He set aside his papers with careful precision. "I'll be equally direct. Your family's company has something I want." "We're not selling," Zoe said immediately. A slight smile curved his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not interested in buying." He stood, towering over the desk. "I'm offering you a choice, Miss Moore, a simple one." He pressed a button on his desk, and a wall panel slid aside to reveal a screen. Numbers and charts appeared. Familiar ones. Moore Heritage Foods financial records, supplier contracts, distribution agreements. "Your company's entire infrastructure," he said quietly, "rests on relationships I can sever with a single phone call. Your credit lines. I own the banks. Your suppliers. I've acquired controlling interests in their parent companies. Your distribution network." He shrugged. "Already compromised." Zoe's hands clenched at her sides. "That's illegal." "Prove it." He circled the desk slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "By the time your lawyers filed the first motion, Moore Heritage Foods would be nothing but a cautionary tale in business school textbooks." Thunder rumbled in the distance as storm clouds gathered outside the windows. Zoe fought to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" Carter Blackwell stopped directly in front of her. "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them like smoke. Zoe blinked, certain she'd misheard. "Excuse me? You will marry me," he continued in that same measured tone. "Within 24 hours. A simple civil ceremony, followed by a pre-written press release announcing our company's merger through marriage. All operations at Moore Heritage Foods will continue unchanged, under your family's management, with full access to Blackwell Global's resources." "And if I refuse?" His smile was razor-sharp. "Then by this time tomorrow, Moore Heritage Foods will cease to exist. 3 generations of your family's work gone. Hundreds of employees, jobless. Your parents' retirement vanished. Your grandmother's legacy destroyed." Zoe's mind raced. "Why? Why would you want? My reasons are my own." He returned to his desk, removing a folder from the top drawer. "The choice is yours, Miss Moore. Sign these papers agreeing to the marriage, and your family's company thrives. Refuse, and watch it burn." Outside, lightning split the sky. Zoe's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Page after page of legal documents, all prepared in advance. He'd planned this, calculated, every move like the master strategist he was reputed to be. "This is insane," she whispered. "It's not ethical. It's not—" "Ethics?" He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "This is business, Miss Moore, nothing more." But it wasn't just business. It was her family's dreams. Their blood and sweat and tears poured into every recipe, every contract, every early morning and late night. It was her grandfather's vision and her parents' dedication and her grandmother's prayers. 24 hours, she said, her voice hollow. "The clock is already ticking." He held out an expensive pen. "Choose wisely." Zoe's signature felt like a betrayal, as she wrote it on page after page, each document another link in the chain being forged around her future. When she finished, Carter Blackwell collected the papers without comment, sliding them into a safe behind his desk. "My assistant will contact you in the morning with details for the ceremony." He didn't look at her again, already returning to his earlier work. "That will be all, Miss Moore." Zoe turned woodenly towards the door. The city lights blurred through the windows, distorted by the first drops of rain striking the glass. The elevator descent felt endless, each floor marking another step toward a future she'd never imagined. In the lobby, she pushed through the revolving doors into the night. Rain fell steadily now, soaking through her clothes as she clutched her briefcase containing copies of the ultimatum papers. Thunder rolled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell began to toll midnight. 24 hours. The countdown had begun. The sunrise painted streaks of pink and orange across the sky as Zoe's car pulled into the familiar driveway of her childhood home. Her parents' vehicles were already there. They'd always been early risers, a habit ingrained from decades of running the family business. The morning dew sparkled on her mother's prized rose bushes as Zoe walked up the path, her heels clicking against the concrete. She found them in the kitchen, her father nursing his usual morning coffee while her mother prepared breakfast. The scene was so normal, so peaceful. It made what she had to do even harder. "Zoe." Her mother's face lit up. "You're here early, sweetheart. Would you like some eggs?" "No." Zoe's voice came out sharper than intended. She placed the manila folder from Blackwell Global on the kitchen table with deliberate care. "I need answers, now." Her parents exchanged a quick glance, so brief most would miss it, but Zoe had grown up watching their silent communications. Her father set down his coffee cup slowly. "What's wrong?" he asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew. Carter Blackwell. Zoe watched their reactions carefully. Her mother's hand froze mid-motion as she was reaching for a spatula. Her father's shoulders tensed. Or should I say Aaron Black? The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, a bird sang its morning song, oblivious to the tension building within the walls of the Moore family home. "Where did you hear that name?" her father finally asked, his voice rough. "It doesn't matter where I heard it. What matters is what you did to him." Zoe pulled out a chair and sat down, her gaze steady. "Tell me about the teenage intern and his mother that Uncle Raymond pushed out years ago." Her mother turned off the stove, abandoning any pretense of breakfast. "Zoe, honey, it was complicated. Then uncomplicate it." Zoe interrupted. "Because that same teenage intern is now Carter Blackwell, CEO of Blackwell Global, and he's demanding I marry him within 24 hours or he'll destroy our company." The color drained from both her parents' faces. Her father's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "He what?" her mother whispered. "You heard me." Zoe spread the ultimatum papers across the table. "So start talking. What really happened?" Her parents sank into chairs at the table, looking suddenly older than their years. Her father ran a hand over his face, shoulders slumped with the weight of old secrets. "It was 15 years ago," he began. "Aaron and his mother Evelyn, they were good people. Evelyn worked in accounting, and Aaron helped out after school. Bright kid, eager to learn everything about the business. Your Uncle Raymond was expanding the company then," her mother added softly. "We'd just landed the Thompson contract. It was going to be our biggest deal yet." Zoe's father nodded. "But there were irregularities in the numbers, small discrepancies that Evelyn noticed. She started asking questions." "And?" Zoe prompted when he fell silent. Her mother wrung her hands. "Raymond said he'd handle it. We thought he'd just talk to her, straighten things out. Instead," her father continued, He fabricated evidence, making it look like Evelyn had been embezzling, made it seem like Aaron was helping her hide the theft. They were gone within a week, fired and threatened with prosecution if they fought back. Zoe felt sick. And you let this happen? We didn't know the full extent. Her mother protested weakly. Raymond handled all the legal aspects. By the time you realized what? Zoe's voice rose. That my uncle had destroyed 2 innocent lives to cover his own tracks, that he'd ruined a teenage boy's future to protect himself. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. Raymond said it was for the good of the company. That one family's troubles couldn't outweigh the livelihoods of all our employees. We told ourselves they'd land on their feet. Her mother whispered. That they were young. They'd recover. Zoe stood up so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. I need air. She walked to the window, staring out at the garden where she'd played as a child, where her grandmother had taught her about integrity and doing what was right. The roses her mother tended so carefully seemed to mock her now, beautiful on the surface, thorns hidden beneath. There's more, isn't there? She asked without turning around. Something you're still not telling me. The silence stretched until her father sighed heavily. Raymond, he may have used some of Aaron's ideas. The boy had written up proposals, marketing strategies. After they were gone, he stole them. Zoe finished flatly. Used a teenager's work to build his own success. Her mother started crying softly. We should have stopped it, should have spoken up. Yes, Zoe said. You should have. She returned to the table and gathered the papers, her movements precise and controlled, despite the storm of emotions inside her. I need to go. Zoe, wait! Her father reached for her arm. She pulled away. I can't process this right now. I need to think. The drive to her apartment passed in a blur. Once home, Zoe booted up her laptop and began searching. Article after article about Carter Blackwell's meteoric rise in the business world, his reputation for brilliant strategy and ruthless efficiency, the way he'd built Blackwell Global from nothing into a corporate empire. She dug deeper, past the polished press releases and carefully crafted public image. Old newspaper archives, court records, property deeds. Slowly, painfully, the picture emerged. Aaron Black and his mother had struggled after leaving More Heritage Foods. They'd moved frequently, taking whatever work they could find. Evelyn's health had deteriorated under the stress. Aaron had dropped out of high school to work multiple jobs, studying for his GED between shifts. Then Aaron Black had disappeared entirely. 3 years later, Carter Blackwell emerged, young, ambitious, and laser-focused on success. He'd changed his name, but kept his mother's maiden name as a reminder. Zoe leaned back in her chair as evening shadows lengthened across her living room. The marriage ultimatum wasn't about business expansion or corporate strategy. It wasn't even about money. It was about a teenage boy who'd watched his mother suffer, who'd had his dreams stolen along with his good name. It was about 15 years of carefully planned revenge, orchestrated by someone who'd learned the hard way that power was the only protection against injustice. Carter Blackwell didn't want to merge their companies. He wanted to make her family feel as trapped and helpless as he'd once felt. The marriage demand wasn't about acquiring More Heritage Foods. It was about making them watch while an outsider took control of everything they'd built, unable to stop it. The realization settled over her like a heavy cloak as she watched the sun sink toward the horizon. This wasn't business. This was personal. And she was caught in the middle of a vendetta 15 years in the making. The city's nighttime pulse felt different now as Zoe drove back to Blackwell Global. The gleaming tower pierced the sky like a sword of judgment, its lights burning against the darkness. Her hands trembled slightly as she parked in the nearly empty garage, but she forced them steady. She needed answers, even if they hurt. The security guard recognized her from earlier, nodding her through without question. The elevator ride to the top floor stretched endlessly, each floor bringing her closer to a confrontation she both dreaded and needed. Carter Blackwell, no, Aaron Black, stood at the wall of windows when she entered, his silhouette sharp against the city lights below. He didn't turn around. "I wondered if you'd come back," he said quietly. "You knew I would." Zoe moved further into the office, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "Once I learned who you really are." Now he did turn, and the mask of corporate indifference had slipped just enough to reveal something raw beneath. Aaron Black, the naive teenager who thought hard work and honesty would be enough. His laugh held no humor. "He died a long time ago." "Did he?" Zoe challenged. "Or did he just get buried under all this?" She gestured at the opulent office, the trappings of power. "You don't know anything about it." The words came out sharp, bitter. "Then tell me. Tell me how Raymond Moore destroyed your life. Tell me about your mother." Something dangerous flashed in Carter's eyes. He stalked toward her with predatory grace. "You want the truth? Here it is. Your precious uncle didn't just fire us. He systematically destroyed us, created false evidence of theft, made it look like my mother and I were stealing from the company." He began to pace, energy crackling off him. "My mother was a good woman, honest, hard-working. She'd never taken so much as a paperclip that wasn't hers. But suddenly there were doctored bank statements, forged signatures, manipulated security footage, all pointing to her, to me." Zoe's heart ached as she watched him relive it. The teenage boy's pain was visible now beneath the man's polished exterior. "We lost everything," he continued. "Not just our jobs, our reputations, our future. No one would hire my mother once Raymond spread his lies. We ended up in a homeless shelter that first month." His voice turned razor sharp. "Do you know what it's like to watch your mother cry herself to sleep on a shelter cot? To see her health fail because she's working 3 minimum wage jobs under false names just to keep food on the table?" "Carter." Zoe stepped toward him, hand outstretched, but he recoiled. "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't pretend to sympathize when your family did this, when they stood by and let it happen. And this marriage ultimatum is your revenge?" she asked softly. He gave her a cold smile. "This marriage is justice, perfectly legal, totally binding, and absolutely real." Moving to his desk, he pulled out a thick folder. "We will live together in my penthouse, attend social functions as husband and wife, present a united front to the world. Your family will watch, helplessly as an outsider takes control of everything they built. Just like I had to watch my mother's life crumble while your uncle built his success on my stolen ideas." Zoe felt sick. "You've planned this for years. 15 years. Carter's voice was eerily calm now. 15 years of rebuilding myself through pain and determination, not mercy. 15 years of preparing for this moment." He spread his hands. "This is my final reckoning." "And what about your mother?" Zoe asked. "What would she think of this revenge?" Something flickered in his expression before he shut it down. "My mother survived. That's what matters." "Is it? Or does it matter more that you've become exactly what destroyed you? Someone who uses power to hurt others?" "Don't." His voice was dangerous now. "Don't try to manipulate me with guilt. This isn't about right and wrong anymore. This is about consequences." Zoe studied him in the pre-dawn dimness, seeing both the wounded boy and the hardened man. "So this marriage will be real, in every way?" "Absolutely." Carter's smile held no warmth. "We'll share a home, a public life, legal ties that bind us together. Your family will watch their precious company, their legacy, fall under my complete control." They'll know that their own lies and silence brought this about. He moved closer, towering over her. And you, Zoe Moore, will wake up every morning knowing that your life belongs to me because they chose profit over truth 15 years ago. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten as Zoe walked out of his office for the second time in 24 hours. Her steps echoed in the empty corridor as the weight of her choice pressed down on her shoulders. Refuse and watch her family's company, their employees' livelihoods be systematically destroyed. Accept and subject herself to a marriage built on revenge and humiliation. The sun was just beginning to rise as she reached her car, painting the city in shades of gold that felt like mockery. In a few hours, she would have to give Carter Blackwell her answer, but in her heart, she already knew. There was no real choice at all. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Mark's Church, casting rainbow patterns across the empty pews. Zoe sat alone in the third row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The familiar scent of wood polish and old hymnals wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. "What would you tell me to do, Marcus?" she whispered, thinking of her late brother. The memory of his laugh, silenced too soon by a drunk driver 5 years ago, still brought both comfort and pain. Marcus had always been the moral compass of the family, the one who could see straight to the heart of any problem. The colorful light shifted as clouds passed overhead, reminding her of afternoons spent in this very church with her grandmother Ruth. Those Sunday school lessons hadn't just been about Bible stories, they'd been about understanding, right from wrong, about the hard choices that defined a person's character. Zoe closed her eyes, remembering one particular conversation from years ago. She'd been 16, wrestling with whether to report a friend's cheating on an important exam. "Truth isn't always comfortable, child," her grandmother had said, her weathered hand smoothing Zoe's hair. "But it's like a medicine, sometimes bitter going down, but necessary for healing." Now at 28, Zoe found herself facing a much harder truth. Her family's comfortable life had been built partly on an injustice, one that had destroyed a teenage boy and his mother. Carter's revenge might be extreme, but the debt was real. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. 10:15 in the morning. Less than 2 hours remained before she needed to give Carter her answer. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Rising from the pew, Zoe made her way to the small prayer garden behind the church. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and late-blooming roses. She found her grandmother tending to the garden, just as she'd expected. "I wondered when you'd come," Ruth said without turning around, her experienced hands carefully pruning a rosebush. "You've got that same look you had when Marcus passed, like you're carrying the world's weight alone." Zoe settled onto a nearby bench, watching her grandmother work. "How do you know when a sacrifice is the right thing to do, Grandma? When it's justice versus revenge?" Ruth straightened slowly, her wise eyes studying Zoe's face. "This is about the Blackwell situation, isn't it? Your daddy called me last night, worried sick." "Yes," Zoe admitted, "but it's more complicated than anyone knows." Carefully she laid out the whole story, Carter's true identity, the injustice done to him and his mother, and his ultimate ultimatum. Her grandmother listened without interruption, her expression growing more grave with each revelation. When Zoe finished, Ruth set aside her gardening tools and sat beside her granddaughter. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "redemption requires more than just saying sorry. Sometimes it needs action, sacrifice, to make things right." She took Zoe's hand in her own. "But revenge and justice aren't the same thing, child. One heals, the other wounds." "What if it could be both?" Zoe asked quietly. "What if by accepting his revenge, I could open a path to healing?" Ruth's eyes filled with understanding. "You're thinking of staying in this marriage not just to save the company, but to try to help him heal? Someone has to break the cycle," Zoe said. "And our family helped create this mess. Maybe this is how we start to fix it." Her grandmother was quiet for a long moment, then reached into her garden apron and pulled out a small, worn Bible. "Your brother Marcus gave me this the Christmas before he died. There's a passage marked that might help you." Zoe opened the Bible to find a highlighted verse. "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Tears pricked at her eyes as she remembered Marcus's favorite saying, "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting back, it's choosing to understand." At 12:45, Zoe walked into the downtown courthouse. Her simple navy blue dress felt appropriate for both a wedding and a surrender. Carter was already waiting in the magistrate's office, his expression unreadable as she entered. The ceremony was brief and stark. No flowers, no music, no witnesses except the required court clerk. When the magistrate asked if anyone objected, the silence felt heavy with unspoken words. "I do," Zoe said clearly when her turn came, meeting Carter's eyes. She saw a flicker of surprise there. Perhaps he'd expected fear or resignation. Instead, she stood straight and proud, accepting this not as a victim, but as someone choosing to bear a burden that might lead to healing. Carter's "I do" was equally firm, though his eyes never softened. The rings were simple gold bands, practical, unadorned, like the marriage itself. As Zoe slipped Carter's ring onto his finger, she noticed the slightest tremor in his hand. For just a moment, she glimpsed the wounded boy beneath the powerful man's facade. "By the power vested in me by the state," the magistrate intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no kiss, no celebration, just the scratch of pen on paper as Zoe signed her new name, Zoe Moore Blackwell. The sun was setting as Carter's private elevator carried them to his penthouse. Neither had spoken since leaving the courthouse. The silence felt like a living thing between them, full of unspoken hurts and carefully guarded hopes. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. Modern art adorned the walls, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Welcome home," Carter said, his voice neutral. He gestured to a hallway on the right. "Your room is the second door. Mine is at the end. The staff has already moved your things." Zoe crossed the threshold, her heels clicking on the marble floor. This was her home now. This beautiful, cold space, so far above the city she'd always known. As Carter disappeared down the hallway without another word, she touched the simple gold band on her finger. "Grant me strength," she whispered, echoing her grandmother's favorite prayer. She would need every ounce of it for the path ahead. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting unfamiliar shadows across Zoe's new bedroom. She blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the pristine white walls and modern furnishings that bore no resemblance to her cozy childhood room. The king-sized bed felt too large, too empty, its crisp sheets still holding their department store creases. For several minutes, Zoe lay perfectly still, listening to the quiet hum of the climate control system and the distant sounds of early morning traffic 40 floors below. Everything in the room was immaculate, from the minimalist artwork to the perfectly arranged decorative pillows. Yet it felt more like a high-end hotel suite than a home. Her phone showed 6:30 in the morning. Back home, her parents would be getting ready for their morning routine at Moore Heritage Foods. The thought sent a sharp pang through her chest. She wondered if they'd slept at all last night, knowing their daughter was now married to the man threatening their livelihood. Pushing back the covers, Zoe padded across the plush carpet to the ensuite bathroom. Like everything else in Carter's penthouse, It was a masterpiece of modern design, all gleaming chrome and marble. Her few personal items looked out of place on the vast counter. A well-loved hairbrush, her favorite jasmine-scented lotion, the small silver cross necklace her grandmother had given her for her 16th birthday. After a shower in the rainfall showerhead that probably cost more than her old car, Zoe dressed carefully in a coral blouse and tailored black pants. She touched up her makeup with steady hands, though her reflection showed the strain around her eyes. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, squaring her shoulders. One day at a time. When she finally ventured out to the kitchen at 7:15, she found Carter already there, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. He stood at the kitchen island, reading something on his tablet while sipping coffee from a sleek black mug. "Good morning," Zoe said quietly, proud that her voice remained steady. Carter barely glanced up. "There's coffee in the pot. Breakfast will be delivered at 7:30 sharp." As if on cue, the elevator chimed, and a uniformed server wheeled in a cart laden with covered dishes. With practiced efficiency, he set 2 place settings at opposite ends of the long dining table, arranged the food, and disappeared as silently as he'd arrived. The spread was impressive: fresh fruit, yogurt parfaits, eggs Benedict, and still warm pastries. But Zoe found her appetite had vanished. She forced herself to take a seat and put a few strawberries on her plate. Carter joined her at the table, maintaining the maximum possible distance between them. For several minutes, the only sounds were the quiet clink of silverware and the occasional rustle of Carter turning pages on his tablet. Finally, he set the tablet aside and fixed her with a direct stare. "We need to establish some ground rules." Zoe set down her fork, meeting his gaze. "All right. First, this marriage exists on paper and in public appearances only. There will be no displays of affection, no attempts at emotional connection." His voice was clinical, as if outlining a business contract. "You'll maintain your own separate bedroom and personal space. I expect you to be present for any important social functions where you'll act the part of a supportive wife. Otherwise, our interactions will be minimal." Zoe nodded, though each word felt like another brick in the wall between them. "Second, I expect complete honesty. No lies, no deception, even by omission." His lips twisted in a bitter smile. "I think your family has done enough of that already." The accusation stung, but Zoe kept her expression neutral. "Agreed. Third, you'll have access to a household account for necessary expenses. Any major purchases must be approved by me first. Your salary from More Heritage Foods will be deposited into your personal account, which remains yours to manage." "And the company?" Zoe asked quietly. "Will you continue blocking our suppliers?" Carter's expression hardened. "The company will operate without interference as long as our arrangement stands. Break any of these rules, and that changes immediately." After breakfast, Zoe returned to her childhood home to pack her belongings. The familiar yellow house seemed smaller somehow, its warmth dimmed by the weight of recent events. Her mother tried to help, but her hands shook so badly while folding clothes that Zoe gently sent her downstairs. Room by room, Zoe sorted through 28 years of memories. Photo albums, old report cards, the teddy bear her brother Marcus had won for her at the state fair the summer before his death. She couldn't take everything. The penthouse bedroom, though spacious, wasn't designed for sentimental clutter. By late afternoon, her life had been condensed into a dozen boxes and 3 suitcases. The moving company Carter had arranged arrived precisely on schedule, efficiently loading everything into their truck. Zoe's father stood in the driveway, looking lost as he watched the movers work. When she approached to say goodbye, he enveloped her in a fierce hug. "We never meant for any of this to happen," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "If we had known—" "I know, Daddy." Zoe said, pulling back to meet his eyes. We can't change the past. We can only try to make things right now. Her mother pressed a small package into her hands, family photos she'd quickly framed, to make that place feel more like home. The gesture nearly broke Zoe's carefully maintained composure. Back at the penthouse, Zoe spent hours organizing her belongings, trying to carve out a small space of familiarity in the stark, modern interior. Carter remained in his home office, door firmly closed, while she worked. As night fell, Zoe found herself drawn to the penthouse's wraparound balcony. The city stretched out below, a glittering tapestry of lights and shadows. The wind this high up was sharp and clean, carrying away the lingering scent of her mother's perfume from their goodbye hug. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the weight of all she'd given up pressing down on her shoulders. The comfortable chaos of her family home, the easy warmth of shared meals, the simple freedom to be herself, all traded for this gilded cage. Yet as she touched the simple gold band on her finger, Zoe knew she'd made the only choice her conscience would allow. Sometimes doing the right thing meant walking the harder path. Her grandmother had taught her that, and now she was living it. The city lights blurred as tears finally slipped down her cheeks. But Zoe Moore Blackwell stood straight and proud on her new balcony, letting the wind dry her tears as she faced her new reality with quiet determination. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Zoe stood in front of her closet, carefully considering her options. Today would be her first public appearance as Mrs. Blackwell at a prestigious business luncheon. After much deliberation, she chose a conservative navy blue dress that projected both confidence and sophistication. The penthouse was quiet except for the faint sound of Carter's voice drifting from his home office, where he was already deep in morning calls. Zoe had quickly learned his routine: up before dawn, workout, calls by 7 o'clock sharp. At precisely 11:30, Carter emerged from his office dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. His eyes swept over her appearance with clinical detachment. "Acceptable," he said curtly. "The car will be here in 5 minutes. I expect you to be familiar with these." He handed her a folder containing profiles of key attendees at the luncheon. The ride to the Four Seasons Hotel was silent, as Zoe memorized names and faces. Carter occasionally glanced at his phone, his jaw tightening with each message. The hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed for the occasion, with round tables draped in cream linens and elegant centerpieces. As they entered, heads turned and conversations hushed. Carter's hand found the small of her back, not intimate, but possessive, as he guided her through the crowd. "Carter, there you are," called out a silver-haired man who Zoe recognized as James Morrison, CEO of a major investment firm. "And this must be the new Mrs. Blackwell we've been hearing about." Zoe offered her hand with a warm smile. "Please, call me Zoe. It's lovely to meet you." "Quite a catch you've made here, Carter," Morrison said with a wink. "Though I must say the news of your marriage came as quite a surprise to us all." "The best decisions often do," Carter replied smoothly, his public persona firmly in place. Throughout lunch, Zoe watched Carter navigate the social dynamics with practiced ease. His responses were measured, his smile never quite reaching his eyes, until the conversation turned to the Blackwell Foundation. "The new youth center in the East Side is doing remarkable work," commented Diana Chen, a prominent board member. "Those coding programs are transforming lives." For just a moment, something in Carter's expression shifted. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and a hint of genuine pride crossed his face. "We're expanding the program to 3 more locations next quarter," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of warmth that Zoe hadn't heard before. The conversation continued, But Zoe's mind was already working. After the luncheon, while Carter attended board meetings, she made her way to the address she'd discreetly noted from the Foundation's website. The Blackwell Youth Center occupied a renovated warehouse in a struggling neighborhood. The building's exterior had been transformed with vibrant murals, and the sound of children's laughter spilled out through open windows. Inside, the space hummed with activity. Teenagers huddled over computers in a state-of-the-art lab, while younger children worked on homework with volunteer tutors. The walls were covered with student artwork and certificates of achievement. "Can I help you?" asked a friendly woman with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'm just observing," Zoe replied, not ready to reveal her identity. "How long has the center been open?" "Going on 3 years now," the woman said proudly. "Mr. Blackwell himself still visits every month, though he thinks no one notices. Always after hours, checking on the programs, leaving notes about improvements needed." She smiled warmly. "The kids call him the Night Guardian. They know someone's looking out for them, even if they rarely see him." Zoe wandered through the center, taking in every detail. In the computer lab, a teenage girl was explaining her coding project to a younger student, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. A wall of photos showed graduation ceremonies, robotics competitions, and smiling families. "That's Marcus." A young boy pointed to one photo, speaking to his friend. "He got a full scholarship to MIT last year. Mr. Blackwell came to his graduation party, said Marcus reminded him of himself at that age." As evening settled over the city, Zoe found herself in the center's small library. A plaque on the wall caught her eye. "In memory of those who showed me kindness when I had nothing else. CB." The words struck something deep within her. She thought of the teenage Aaron Black, betrayed and angry, transforming his pain into purpose. The man who built an empire of glass and steel, yet still slipped into this center at night to ensure every child had the chances he'd nearly lost. Later that night, back in the penthouse, Zoe stood at her bedroom window. The city lights blurred as she recalled the joy on the children's faces, the pride in their accomplishments, the hope in their futures, all made possible by the man who now seemed determined to keep everyone at arm's length. She thought of his subtle shift when discussing the Foundation, that brief glimpse of genuine feeling beneath the carefully constructed facade. The wounded boy who became the billionaire hadn't just sought revenge, he'd also created something meaningful from his pain. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Zoe woke early, her mind made up after yesterday's revelations at the youth center. Instead of her usual business attire, she dressed in comfortable jeans and a simple blouse, then made her way back to the Blackwell Foundation. This time, she walked straight to the front desk. "Good morning. I'm Zoe Blackwell, and I'd like to volunteer today." The receptionist's eyes widened slightly. "Mrs. Blackwell, of course. Let me call Mrs. Thompson, our volunteer coordinator." Within minutes, the same grey-haired woman Zoe had met yesterday appeared, looking surprised but pleased. "Mrs. Blackwell, this is unexpected. Are you sure Mr. Blackwell wouldn't prefer—" "Please call me Zoe," she interrupted gently. "And this isn't about what Carter would prefer. I'd like to help if you'll have me." Mrs. Thompson's face softened. "Well then, Zoe, let's put you to work." The morning passed quickly as Zoe helped younger children with their reading assignments. She sat cross-legged on colourful floor cushions, listening patiently as 8-year-old Marcus sounded out difficult words and praised 12-year-old Tiana's creative writing story. "You're good with them," Mrs. Thompson observed during lunch break. "Most of our kids come from challenging situations. They can tell when someone genuinely cares." Zoe thought about Carter's monthly night visits. Sometimes the people who seem the most distant are the ones who care the most deeply. In the afternoon, Zoe joined the teenage coding class. Though she couldn't help with the technical aspects, she offered encouragement and listened as students explained their projects with growing confidence. "I never thought I could do something like this," admitted 16-year-old Jasmine, showing Zoe her nearly completed website. "But Mr. Blackwell's foundation gave me a chance nobody else would." "Tell me more about that," Zoe encouraged, noting how the girl's entire face lit up when talking about her future plans. "Well, last year I was really struggling. My mum lost her job, and I was thinking about dropping out to help support my little sisters." Jasmine's voice grew quiet. "Then one day, Mr. Blackwell himself came to visit. He hardly ever comes during the day, but he talked to me for almost an hour about coding and business and never giving up. The next week, my mum got called for an interview at one of his companies. She's been working there ever since." Stories like this emerged throughout the day. Small acts of kindness that had changed lives, always done quietly, without fanfare. The Carter Blackwell these people knew was very different from the man who had forced her into marriage. As the afternoon wound down, Zoe helped clean up the art room, wiping paint from tables while children's masterpieces dried on hanging lines. Mrs. Thompson appeared in the doorway. "Zoe, you've been wonderful today. The children really responded to you." She hesitated. "Would you consider making this a regular thing? We could use someone with your heart." Before Zoe could respond, a familiar voice came from behind them. "Indeed. What exactly is your angle here?" Carter stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Thompson quickly excused herself, leaving them alone among the children's artwork. "Not everything has an angle, Carter," Zoe said quietly, continuing to clean. "Sometimes people just want to help." He moved further into the room, picking up a student's painting of a night sky filled with stars. "You were here yesterday too. My security team informed me." "Yes, I was." Zoe set down her cleaning cloth and faced him directly. "I wanted to understand." "Understand what?" "The man who builds centers like this, who visits at night to make sure everything is perfect, who remembers what it's like to be a teenager with nothing but dreams and determination." She gestured to the walls around them. "This place isn't about revenge or power, it's about healing." Carter's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about healing." "Don't I?" Zoe stepped closer. "My faith teaches me that pain doesn't have to define us, that we can choose what we build from our broken pieces." She pointed to the painting in his hands. "That child didn't know how to paint stars 3 months ago. Now look at what they created. That's what healing looks like." For a long moment, Carter stood perfectly still, staring at the painting. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Why are you really here, Zoe?" The use of her first name hung in the air between them, delicate as a soap bubble. It was the first time he'd called her anything but Mrs. Blackwell since their wedding. "Because I believe in redemption," she answered simply. "For everyone involved in this story, including you, Carter, including my family, including myself." He set the painting down carefully, his movements precise. "The foundation is off limits. This can't happen again." But something had shifted in his voice. The steel edge was dulled, almost uncertain. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Zoe." She looked up. "The children's art show is next Friday evening, if you'd like to attend." That would be acceptable. He was gone before she could respond, but his words echoed in the quiet room. Not Mrs. Blackwell. Zoe, and an invitation, however small, to return. Through the windows, the setting sun painted the room in soft oranges and pinks, catching on the children's artwork and making the colors glow. Zoe touched the painting Carter had been holding, tracing its hopeful stars with gentle fingers. Someone had written a caption below it. Even on the darkest nights, there is always light to be found. The weekend passed in a blur of polite distance and careful routines. Monday brought rain, Tuesday sunshine, and Wednesday evening found Zoe alone in Carter's expansive kitchen, mindlessly stirring a pot of homemade soup. The familiar motions of cooking grounded her, reminding her of countless family dinners in her mother's kitchen. The elevator's soft chime announced Carter's arrival. His footsteps, usually sharp and purposeful, seemed slower tonight. Zoe glanced up as he entered, noting the shadows under his eyes and the slight slump of his shoulders. "You're cooking," he observed, loosening his tie. "My grandmother's recipe," Zoe replied, ladling the soup into bowls. "Chicken and wild rice. Would you like some?" To her surprise, Carter nodded, shrugging off his suit jacket and draping it over a kitchen chair. The simple domesticity of the moment felt strange, like a scene from someone else's life. "It's been a long day," he said, accepting the bowl she offered. "Thank you." They settled at opposite ends of the dining table, the city lights twinkling through floor-to-ceiling windows. The silence between them felt different tonight, less hostile, more contemplative. "My mother used to make soup when I was sick," Carter said suddenly, his voice quiet. "Before everything happened, she worked 3 jobs after we left Moore Heritage, but she'd still find time to cook when I had a cold." Zoe's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Carter rarely mentioned his mother or their past. "Is she—" Zoe hesitated, unsure how to ask. "She's alive," Carter confirmed. "Living quietly in a small town upstate. I bought her a house there, made sure she'd never have to work again." He stirred his soup absently. "She doesn't approve of what I've become." The admission hung heavy in the air. Zoe waited, sensing there was more. "This marriage," Carter continued, meeting her eyes for the first time that evening. "I never intended. That is, I want you to know I won't expect—" He set down his spoon, frustration crossing his face. "Physical intimacy was never part of my plan." Zoe felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. "Why tell me this now?" Carter's fingers tightened around his water glass. "Because I'm afraid," he admitted, the words seemingly torn from him. "Afraid of becoming the kind of man who would use that power over someone. Afraid of truly becoming the monster everyone believes me to be." The raw honesty in his voice touched something in Zoe's heart. She thought of the community center, of the lives he'd changed, of the wounded boy who'd grown into this complex man. "I understand fear," she said softly. "After my brother died, I was terrified of living in a world without him. Marcus was my protector, my best friend. He died saving a child from drowning, a complete stranger's daughter. Everyone called him a hero, but I was so angry." Her voice caught. "Angry at God, at the universe, at Marcus himself for leaving us." Carter's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "What changed?" "I realized my anger was poisoning everything good about his memory. The bitterness was destroying me, not honoring him." Zoe wrapped her hands around her soup bowl, drawing comfort from its warmth. "My grandmother helped me understand that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing to live fully despite the pain. Marcus died showing love to a stranger. The least I could do was learn to love again myself." "Your grandmother sounds wise," Carter said quietly. "She is. She taught me that healing isn't linear. Some days are harder than others, but that's okay." Zoe offered a small smile. "The important thing is to keep trying." Carter was silent for a long moment, absently turning his wedding ring. When he spoke again, his voice held a note of vulnerability she'd never heard before. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "This marriage, these conversations, I've spent so long building walls." Maybe we start with honesty, Zoe suggested, instead of hostility. We're both here, trapped in this situation we created. We could try to make it less painful. Honesty, Carter repeated, testing the word. I'm not sure I remember how. We could practice, Zoe said. Like right now. Honestly, this soup needs more salt. A startled laugh escaped Carter, brief and rusty, as if unused, but real. He reached for the salt shaker, passing it to her with the ghost of a smile. Honestly, he said, it's still better than anything I've had in weeks. They finished their meal in companionable quiet, the city humming far below. When Carter stood to help clear the dishes, another first, his movements were less rigid, less guarded. Thank you, he said at last, standing in the kitchen doorway. For dinner, and for... He gestured vaguely, struggling to find words. For practicing honesty? Zoe supplied. Carter nodded. Yes, that. He hesitated, then added softly, Good night, Zoe. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, Zoe looked out at the city lights, thinking of stars painted by children's hands and the slow, careful work of building bridges across broken places. The hope that unfurled in her chest was fragile, delicate as a newly sprouted seed. But it was there. For tonight, that was enough. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter's penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. Zoe moved quietly through the space, still adjusting to calling it home. After last night's breakthrough, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps their arranged marriage could evolve into something less painful. She paused at Carter's home office door, noticing it was slightly ajar, unusual given his meticulous nature. A cleaning cart stood nearby, explaining the oversight. Zoe stepped inside, intending to close it properly, when a manila folder caught her eye. It lay askew on the otherwise immaculate desk, its contents partially visible. Her own family name jumped out at her. More family asset dissolution strategy. Zoe's hand trembled as she reached for the folder. She knew she shouldn't look, but something in her gut urged her forward. The first page was dated 3 years ago, long before their marriage. As she began to read, her heart sank like a stone. The documents outlined a comprehensive plan spanning 5 years. Phase 1, marry into the Moore family to gain insider access. Phase 2, document all past irregularities while appearing to reconcile. Phase 3, launch a coordinated media and legal campaign exposing decades of supposed corporate fraud, culminating in total asset seizure and public disgrace. Zoe sank into Carter's leather chair, her legs too weak to hold her. Page after page detailed how he would systematically destroy everything her grandparents had built. The marriage wasn't just revenge. It was a tactical move in a long-term strategy to annihilate her entire family. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from her uncle Raymond. Need to discuss urgent business matter. Meet me at the office at 2 o'clock. Zoe's hands shook as she carefully returned the folder exactly as she'd found it. The cleaning cart's wheels squeaked in the hallway, and she slipped out of the office, her mind racing. Hours later, she stood in her uncle's office at Moore Heritage Foods, clutching her purse like a shield. Raymond sat behind his desk, his usual smooth smile in place. I've heard whispers, he said without preamble, about Carter Blackwell's true identity, about his plans. You knew? Zoe's voice cracked. You knew who he was all along? Raymond's smile never wavered. Of course I knew. I keep tabs on all potential threats. But you're the one who married him, dear niece. When this all comes out, who do you think the board will blame? What are you talking about? It's quite simple. Raymond leaned back, steepling his fingers. You married him without disclosing his connection to our company. You gave him inside access. When he moves against us, it will look like you were his willing accomplice all along. Horror dawned as Zoe realized his implications. You're going to pin everything on me? Your own niece? Business is business, Raymond said coldly. I protected this company once before. I'll do it again. The board will have no choice but to believe you betrayed us. After all, you're the one who signed the marriage certificate. This isn't about protecting the company. Zoe shot back, anger rising. This is about protecting yourself. You're the one who destroyed Aaron Black's life. You're the one who falsified those documents. Prove it. Raymond's voice was silk over steel. Every paper trail leads to your father's desk, not mine. And now, with your suspicious marriage... He shrugged. Well, like father, like daughter, they'll say. You're a monster, Zoe whispered. I'm a survivor. Raymond corrected. And survivors adapt. Speaking of which, he glanced at his watch. I believe your husband is due here any minute to discuss our distribution contract renewal. As if on cue, voices approached in the hallway. Zoe recognized Carter's measured tones mixing with her father's nervous chatter. I'd hurry along if I were you, Raymond said softly. Unless you want to explain to your new husband why you're meeting secretly with the uncle who supposedly wronged him. Zoe backed toward the door, her mind spinning, but she wasn't fast enough. The door opened, and Carter stood there, his expression shifting from surprise to suspicion as he took in the scene. What's going on here? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Just a family chat, Raymond said smoothly, standing. Your wife was expressing some concerns about company loyalty. Carter's eyes locked onto Zoe's face, searching for truth. The warmth from last night had vanished, replaced by walls of ice. Loyalty, he repeated. Interesting topic. Carter, I can explain. Zoe started. No need. He cut her off. I think I understand perfectly. He turned to Raymond. We'll reschedule our meeting. Without another word, he strode away. Zoe hurried after him, catching up at the elevators. Please, let me explain, she pleaded. It's not what you think. Isn't it? Carter's voice was arctic. Tell me, was last night's performance part of your uncle's strategy or your own? Performance? Carter, no. I trusted you, he said quietly. For one moment, I actually believed. He shook his head. My mother warned me about trust. I should have listened. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding that felt like mockery. Carter stepped inside, his face a mask of stone. Don't bother coming home tonight, he said as the doors closed. I'll have security pack your things. Zoe stood in the empty hallway, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, she heard Raymond's soft chuckle. Well, her uncle said, I suppose that takes care of that. Zoe walked out of Moore Heritage Foods in a daze, past the photos of her grandparents on the walls, past the empty desk where her brother used to work, past everything that had once meant family and security and home. The sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in colors too beautiful for such a dark day. She had lost everything, her marriage, her family's trust, her home, in the space of 12 hours. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, two wounded souls retreated behind their walls, each believing the other's betrayal complete. The morning sun struggled to pierce through heavy clouds, matching Zoe's somber mood as she drove through familiar neighborhoods. Her heart felt as heavy as the gray sky above. She hadn't slept all night, replaying Carter's words over and over in her mind. Don't bother coming home tonight. Home. The word itself seemed to mock her now. Her childhood home felt tainted by decades of secrets, and Carter's penthouse had never truly been hers. Only one place remained where she might find clarity, her grandmother's modest house on the outskirts of town. Zoe parked in the cracked concrete driveway, noting how the morning glories still climbed faithfully up the trellis her grandfather had built years ago. Some things, at least, remained constant. The screen door creaked, its familiar welcome as she approached. Her grandmother, Ruth Moore, opened the door before Zoe could knock. "I had a feeling you'd come," she said softly, pulling Zoe into a warm embrace that smelled of fresh bread and lavender. "How did you know?" Zoe asked, her voice muffled against her grandmother's shoulder. "A grandmother always knows when her babies are hurting." Ruth guided her inside to the sunny kitchen, where 2 cups of steaming tea already waited. "Now, tell me everything." Zoe sank into the worn kitchen chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. The familiar surroundings, the faded checkered curtains, the well-loved Bible on the counter, the gentle tick of the old wall clock, helped steady her racing thoughts. "I don't even know where to start, Grandma," she admitted. "The beginning is usually best." Ruth replied, settling into her own chair. "Though I suspect this story has many beginnings." Over the next hour, Zoe poured out everything. Carter's true identity as Aaron Black, Uncle Raymond's manipulation, the forced marriage, the growing connection with Carter that had been shattered by yesterday's discovery. Her grandmother listened without interruption, her wise eyes taking in every detail. "And now," Zoe concluded, "everything's ruined. Carter thinks I betrayed him. Uncle Raymond's going to blame me for everything. The company could fall apart. I don't know what to do." Ruth was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands wrapped around her cooling tea. "Do you remember the story of David and Nathan?" Zoe nodded, familiar with her grandmother's way of finding biblical wisdom for modern problems. "Nathan could have stayed silent about David's sin with Bathsheba. It would have been easier, safer. But he chose truth, even knowing it would hurt the king he served." Ruth reached across the table to take Zoe's hand. "Truth is rarely comfortable, child, but it's the only foundation strong enough to build a life on." "But Grandma, the truth could destroy everything our family has built." "No." Ruth's voice was firm. "Lies are what's destroying our family. They've been eating away at our foundation for years, like termites in wood. The truth might hurt, but it's the only thing that can set things right." Zoe stared into her empty cup, watching the last drops of tea settle. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of course you are. Truth-tellers often are. But fear doesn't make us wrong. It just makes us human." Ruth squeezed her hand. "Remember what your grandfather used to say? The right path and the easy path rarely look the same," Zoe quoted, managing a small smile. They spent the afternoon together, Ruth sharing stories of her own struggles with truth and consequence over the years. She spoke of times when speaking up had cost her friendships and times when staying silent had cost her peace. As the day wore on, Zoe felt strength seeping back into her spirit. Around 4 o'clock, Ruth brought out an old album. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a faded picture of Zoe's grandfather standing proudly in front of the original Moore Heritage Food storefront. "Your grandfather built this business on honesty and hard work. Whatever happens, that legacy is worth protecting. Not just the company, but the principles it was founded on." Zoe traced her finger over her grandfather's smiling face. "He would be so disappointed in what we've become." "Then change it," Ruth said simply. "You can't control how others react to the truth, but you can control whether you speak it." As evening approached, Zoe stood on her grandmother's front porch, watching the sunset paint the clouds in shades of pink and gold. The weight in her chest hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something more like purpose than pain. "I have to tell everyone everything," she said quietly. "About Uncle Raymond's deception, about Carter's past, about my own part in all of this. even if it costs me everything." Ruth nodded, pride shining in her eyes. "That's my girl. Will you pray with me, Grandma? For courage?" "Of course." Ruth took her hands, and together they bowed their heads as the day's last light wrapped around them like a blessing. When Zoe finally drove away, her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a life on. She didn't know exactly how she would reveal everything, or what the consequences would be, but she knew with certainty that she couldn't continue living in shadows. The sun had set completely now, leaving the sky in that brief, beautiful moment between day and night. Zoe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle into her bones. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring, but tonight, for the first time since this whole ordeal began, she felt truly at peace with herself. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Carter's penthouse as Zoe sat at the pristine glass desk in her room. The city stretched out below, already buzzing with activity, while she stared at the blank document on her laptop screen. The cursor blinked steadily, like a heartbeat counting down the moments until tomorrow night's gala. She had chosen this spot carefully, knowing Carter would be at the office all day. The distance between them had grown into a physical thing, heavy and cold. When she'd passed him in the hallway early this morning, he'd turned away, his shoulders rigid with distrust. The pain of it still echoed in her chest, but she couldn't let that deter her from what needed to be done. Taking a deep breath, Zoe began to type. "My name is Zoe Moore Blackwell, and I am here to tell you the truth." The words came slowly at first, then faster as she poured out the whole story. She wrote about Aaron Black, the promising young intern who had been wrongfully pushed out. She detailed her Uncle Raymond's manipulation of company records and the devastating impact it had on the Blacks' lives. Her fingers trembled as she described her own role in the current situation, both her initial compliance with the marriage ultimatum and her growing understanding of the deeper wounds involved. Around noon, Zoe printed the first draft and read it aloud, pacing the length of her room. The words felt clumsy, inadequate. She crossed out entire paragraphs, rewrote sections, struggled to find the balance between necessary truth and unnecessary hurt. "Lord," she whispered, stopping by the window. "Give me the words. Help me speak truth with grace." She worked through lunch, barely noticing when the afternoon sun shifted across the floor. The fifth draft felt stronger, clearer. Still, she read it again, marking places where the tone needed adjustment. This wasn't about revenge or self-justification. It was about healing, about bringing light to dark places. At 3 o'clock, Zoe's phone buzzed with a reminder about the gala preparations. The event planner had sent over final details: cocktails at 7, dinner at 8, speeches scheduled to begin at 9:30. Her name was listed among the speakers, right after Carter's welcome address. The timing felt like divine providence. She wouldn't have to request a speaking slot. She printed what she hoped would be the final version and took it to the penthouse's private chapel, a small, peaceful room Carter had surprisingly included in the design. Kneeling on the cushioned bench, Zoe read the speech one more time, this time as a prayer. "Give me strength," she prayed, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet space. Not just for tomorrow night, but for whatever comes after. The sound of the front door opening startled her. Carter was home early. Zoe quickly gathered her papers and slipped out of the chapel, hearing his footsteps heading toward his office. The distance between them ached, but she resisted the urge to seek him out. Tonight, he needed his space, and she needed to finish her preparations. Back in her room, Zoe spent the next few hours memorizing key parts of her speech. She didn't want to read the whole thing from paper. Some truths needed to be spoken from the heart. Standing before her full-length mirror, she practiced making eye contact, speaking clearly, maintaining composure, My name is Zoe Moore Blackwell, she repeated for what felt like the 100th time, and I am here to tell you the truth. As evening settled over the city, Zoe heard Carter's office door open and close, followed by his footsteps down the hall. The soft ding of the elevator told her he was leaving again, probably for another late night at the office. The silence he left behind felt heavy with unspoken words. Zoe forced herself to eat a light dinner, knowing she'd need her strength for tomorrow. She spent the next few hours going over every detail. Her dress was pressed and ready. Her speech was as perfect as she could make it. Her heart was prepared for whatever consequences might come. Just before midnight, Zoe carefully folded the final version of her speech and placed it in her purse, a simple black clutch she'd chosen for tomorrow night. Her hands were steady, her breathing calm. The fear hadn't gone away, but it had transformed into something else, a quiet certainty that this was the right path, no matter how difficult. She walked to the window one last time, looking out at the glittering city lights. Tomorrow would change everything, but tonight, in this moment of calm before the storm, she felt the peace that comes with absolute clarity of purpose. The truth would finally be spoken, and whatever happened after that would be in God's hands. The Blackwell Global Shareholder Gala transformed the company's top floor into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in crisp white linens and decorated with centerpieces of white roses and silver accents. The city's most powerful figures moved through the space in designer evening wear, their quiet conversations creating a steady hum beneath the soft classical music. Zoe stood near the back of the room, her fingers nervously smoothing the silk of her navy blue gown. She'd chosen it carefully, elegant but understated, appropriate for both a CEO's wife and what she needed to do tonight. Her grandmother's pearl necklace felt cool against her throat, a reminder of the wisdom that had led her here. She watched Carter work the room with practiced ease. In his perfectly tailored black tuxedo, he looked every inch the powerful CEO. But she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful distance he maintained even while shaking hands and sharing polite laughs. He hadn't looked at her once since they'd arrived separately. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event coordinator announced at precisely 9:30. "Please take your seats. Mr. Blackwell will begin his address shortly." Zoe's heart pounded as she made her way to her assigned seat at the main table. Her purse felt heavy with the weight of her prepared speech, though she'd practically memorized every word. Around her, board members and their spouses settled into their chairs, some offering her small nods of acknowledgement. Carter stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. "Good evening," he began, his voice smooth and controlled. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate another remarkable year at Blackwell Global." As he launched into his carefully crafted speech about quarterly profits and future projections, Zoe felt an almost supernatural calm settle over her. She knew what she had to do. The truth couldn't wait for a convenient moment. There would never be one. Carter was building to his conclusion, describing the company's commitment to excellence, when Zoe stood. A few nearby guests glanced at her curiously, but she kept her eyes focused straight ahead. Her legs felt steady as she walked toward the podium. And so, as we look to the future— Carter stopped mid-sentence as Zoe approached. For the first time in days, their eyes met. She saw confusion, then anger flash across his face. "I apologize for the interruption," Zoe said clearly into the microphone, her voice carrying across the now silent room. "But there's something that needs to be said tonight." She could feel the tension rippling through the crowd. Security guards shifted uncertainly at the edges of the room, looking to Carter for direction. But he remained frozen, his knuckles white against the podium. "My name is Zoe Moore Blackwell," she continued, her voice growing stronger. And I'm here to tell you the truth about how I came to stand before you tonight. The silence in the room deepened. Hundreds of eyes fixed on her, some curious, some concerned, all attentive. 20 years ago, a young intern named Aaron Black worked at Moore Heritage Foods. He was brilliant, hard-working, and honest. He and his mother trusted our company, trusted my family. Zoe paused, glancing at Carter. His face had gone completely still. That trust was betrayed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some of the older board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My uncle Raymond Moore manipulated company records to push Aaron and his mother out, stealing their chance at success to secure a contract for himself. My parents, though they didn't orchestrate it, chose silence over truth. And I— Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. I continued that silence when I learned of it, trying to protect my family's reputation instead of making things right. The room had grown so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Zoe could see phones being lowered. No one wanted to miss what was coming next. Aaron Black survived. He rebuilt himself into the man you now know as Carter Blackwell. Another wave of whispers swept through the room. When he discovered my family's company was vulnerable, he used that leverage to force me into marriage, a perfect revenge against the family that had wronged him. She turned to face Carter directly now. His expression remained unreadable, but she could see the rapid rise and fall of his chest. I don't stand here to excuse my family's actions or my own complicity. What was done to you and your mother was wrong. The years of suffering you endured because of our choices, that was wrong. The silence that protected the guilty while the innocent suffered, that was wrong. Tears pricked at her eyes, but her voice remained clear. I'm here tonight because I believe that truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation for healing. I accept whatever consequences come from this confession, both legal and personal. The truth needed to be spoken. Zoe stepped back from the microphone. Her piece said. The silence that followed felt electric, charged with shock and revelation. Every eye in the room swung toward Carter, waiting for his response. He stood completely still, his face a mask of competing emotions. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present, shareholders, board members, staff, all holding their breath to see how this public revelation would play out. The silence stretched on, filled with possibility and danger. In that suspended moment, Zoe kept her eyes steady on Carter, ready to accept whatever came next. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring until Carter finally moved. His fingers drummed once on the podium, then stilled. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 decades. 20 years ago. He began slowly. A boy named Aaron Black watched his mother cry herself to sleep night after night. They'd lost everything, their savings, their reputation, their chance at a better life. That boy made himself 2 promises: to never be powerless again and to make those who hurt him pay. He loosened his tie slightly, something none of the gathered executives had ever seen him do. That boy grew up angry. He built Blackwell Global not just on talent and determination, but on revenge. Every success, every acquisition, every victory was fuel for the day he'd finally destroy the Moore family. Carter's gaze swept across the room, landing on faces he'd known for years. You've all praised my business acumen, my strategic thinking. The truth is, much of it was shaped by that singular purpose. I convinced myself that revenge was justice, that destruction was restoration. He paused, his eyes finding Zoe's. When I forced this marriage, I thought I'd finally won. I would have the perfect view as I dismantled everything the Moores had built. I had the contracts drawn up, the legal groundwork laid, every detail planned to ensure maximum damage. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. Carter continued, his voice growing quieter but no less intense. But something unexpected happened. I watched Zoe volunteer at our foundation. I saw her sit with struggling families, heard her encourage our staff. She showed me that pain doesn't have to define us, that choosing revenge means letting the past win. His hands gripped the podium tighter. Tonight, Zoe Moore Blackwell chose truth over self-preservation. She risked everything to right a wrong, even knowing it could cost her everything. In doing so, she showed more courage than I have in 20 years of plotting revenge. Carter straightened, squaring his shoulders. Effective immediately, I am halting all planned actions against Moore Heritage Foods. The company will be restructured, with full protection for its innocent workers and staff. However, his voice hardened slightly. Those directly responsible for the fraud 20 years ago will face appropriate legal consequences. He turned to face Zoe fully now. I built this company promising to transform lives. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that transformation has to start within. Revenge may have fueled my success, but it nearly cost me my soul. The room remained silent, processing this unprecedented display of vulnerability from their usually stoic CEO. Carter stepped away from the podium, his next words quieter but still clear in the hushed space. This gala is concluded. Thank you all for coming. The crowd stirred, uncertain whether to applaud or remain silent. Carter ignored them all, walking straight toward Zoe. His face showed the strain of emotions he'd kept buried for decades. Without a word, he gestured toward the terrace doors. Zoe nodded, understanding. Together they walked through the parting crowd, leaving behind the whispers and stares. The night air hit them like a gentle wave as they stepped outside. The city stretched below them, a tapestry of lights and shadows. For several long moments, neither spoke. The sounds of the gala faded behind them, leaving only the distant hum of traffic below. Carter's hands gripped the terrace railing, his knuckles white with tension. The mask of control he'd worn for so long had cracked, revealing the turmoil beneath. His shoulders shook slightly, not with tears, but with the effort of containing 20 years of pain and anger finally breaking free. Zoe stood quietly beside him, offering presence without pressure. She understood that some moments needed silence to be fully felt. The wind lifted her dress slightly, carrying with it the scent of coming rain. It felt fitting somehow, as if the very sky recognized this moment of cleansing, of old wounds finally being allowed to heal. In the quiet days that followed, the city's rhythm continued unchanged, but within Carter and Zoe's world, everything had shifted. The morning after the gala dawned clear and crisp, a gentle September breeze stirring the curtains in their penthouse. Carter stood at the kitchen window, coffee untouched in his hand, when he finally spoke the words he'd been holding back. I need to see my mother. Zoe looked up from her tea, understanding the weight of his decision. Would you like me to come with you? He shook his head slowly. This is something I need to do alone, but thank you. The drive to his mother's modest apartment took 30 minutes, each mile heavy with memories. Evelyn Black lived in a small but well-kept building on the outskirts of town, where rent was affordable on her teacher's pension. Carter parked his luxury car, feeling oddly out of place in the neighborhood where he'd once belonged. His knock was gentle, almost hesitant. When the door opened, he found himself face to face with a woman time had touched, but not broken. Evelyn's hair had gone silver, but her eyes, his eyes, still held that same quiet strength. Aaron, she whispered, using the name he'd left behind. Then catching herself. Carter. Mom. His voice cracked on the word. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. She pulled him into her arms, and suddenly he was that teenage boy again, scared and hurting, but finally, home. They cried together in her small living room, surrounded by photos of the life they'd lived apart. His graduations she'd watched from afar, his business successes she'd tracked in newspapers. "I wanted to protect you," he explained, sitting on her worn couch. "I thought if I became powerful enough, no one could hurt us again. But I lost myself in the process." Evelyn touched his cheek gently. "You were always more than your pain, sweetheart. I knew that even when you couldn't see it yourself." They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of 20 years. She told him about her students, the small victories and daily joys she'd found in teaching. He shared stories of building his company, admitting how empty each success had felt without her there to share it. "Tell me about Zoe," Evelyn said finally, her eyes gentle but knowing. "The real story, not what the papers say." Carter's expression softened. "She showed me there's more strength in forgiveness than revenge. She's everything I thought I didn't deserve." Across town, another family was facing their own moment of truth. In the Moore family home, Zoe sat with her parents as they struggled to find words for their regret. "We were so focused on protecting the business," her father admitted, his voice heavy. "We told ourselves we were protecting our legacy, our community. But we forgot that legacy means nothing without honor." Zoe's mother reached for her hand. "When you stood up at that gala, you showed more courage than we ever did. We're so proud of you, baby, and so sorry we put you in that position." "I understand why you did it," Zoe said softly. "But understanding isn't the same as accepting. We have to be better than our fears." The days flowed into a week, marked by small changes and quiet revelations. Carter and Zoe found themselves sharing real conversations over dinner, no longer performing roles, but speaking as equals. One evening, as they sat on their terrace watching the sunset, Carter finally asked the question that had been weighing on his heart. "Do you regret it? Marrying me, even knowing what I planned?" Zoe considered carefully before answering. "I regret that it took pain to bring us here, but I don't regret choosing to face the truth, even when it hurt. And I don't regret falling in love with the man behind the revenge." Carter turned to her, surprised. "Love." She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, not the love I expected or planned for, but real love, grown from seeing each other at our worst and choosing to be better." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "I thought I knew everything about power, but you showed me the greatest power lies in choosing truth over pride, forgiveness over vengeance." He paused, gathering courage. "The marriage contract is void now. You're free to go if you want." "And if I want to stay, then stay," he said softly. "Not because of a contract or obligation. Stay because you choose to. Stay because somehow in all this mess, we found something real." Zoe squeezed his hand, feeling the tension in his fingers ease. "Then I choose to stay, not as Mrs. Blackwell the obligation, but as Zoe who loves you." The city lights flickered below them, a testament to how far they'd both come from that first night in his office. But now the lights didn't feel like judgment. They felt like stars, witnessing a new beginning born from the ashes of old pain. Carter pulled her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you too, not as revenge or victory, but as the person who showed me how to be whole again." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching night settle over the city. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning, but from choosing to lay down arms and let love heal what hatred broke. The small church glowed with late afternoon sunlight, streaming through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across wooden pews worn smooth by generations of faithful worshippers. White roses and baby's breath adorned the simple altar, their sweet fragrance mingling with the familiar scent of old hymnals and polished wood. Zoe stood in the modest side room, smoothing her cream-colored dress. Simpler than any designer gown, but far more meaningful. Her grandmother Ruth adjusted the small pearl necklace at her throat, a family heirloom that had seen 4 generations of Moore women through their most important days. "Your brother would be so proud of you," Ruth said softly, her weathered hands gentle on Zoe's shoulders. "He always said you had the strongest heart in the family." Tears pricked at Zoe's eyes. "I wish he was here." "He is, baby, in all the ways that matter." Ruth touched the silver cross pendant that had belonged to Zoe's brother. "Love doesn't end. It just changes shape." Down the hall, Carter stood with his mother Evelyn, who straightened his tie with trembling fingers. The past weeks had brought healing neither thought possible. She'd moved back to the city, taking a teaching position at a local school, building new memories to replace old hurts. "I never thought I'd see this day," Evelyn admitted, smoothing Carter's lapel. "For so long, I was afraid anger would be your only legacy." Carter covered her hand with his. "I learned from the best that it's never too late to choose differently." He paused, emotion thick in his voice. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." The small sanctuary filled slowly with people whose lives had been touched by both families. Workers from Moore Heritage Foods sat beside employees from Blackwell Global. Children from Carter's Foundation programs giggled in their Sunday best, while teachers from Evelyn's school chatted with Zoe's colleagues. As the afternoon sun painted the church in amber light, Zoe walked down the aisle on her father's arm. This time, there were no contracts, no ultimatums, no fear. Only love, freely given and gratefully received. Carter waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving her face. Gone was the cold mask of the vengeful billionaire. In its place was the man who had learned that true strength lies not in power, but in the courage to be vulnerable. They faced each other before the weathered wooden cross, hands joined, hearts open. The pastor, the same one who had counseled Zoe through her darkest days, smiled warmly at the gathered congregation. "We are here today not to create a union, but to celebrate one that God has already blessed," he began. "A union that began in shadow, but emerged into light. A testament to the transformative power of truth, forgiveness, and faith." Zoe's voice was clear and steady as she spoke her vows. "I once stood before you out of duty, but today I stand here out of love. I promise to keep choosing love over fear, truth over comfort, and faith over doubt. To be your partner in healing, your companion in joy, and your shelter in storms." Carter's usually confident voice wavered with emotion. "I came to you seeking revenge, but found redemption instead. I promise to honor the gift of your forgiveness, to cherish the strength of your character, and to love you with the same grace you showed me. Where I once built walls, I now choose to build bridges." Ruth and Evelyn sat together in the front pew, years of pain dissolved in shared tears of joy. Behind them, the combined communities of both families witnessed love's power to heal what hatred had broken. As the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, this time in the sight of God and family, the setting sun broke through the clouds, flooding the sanctuary with golden light. Carter drew Zoe close, their kiss a seal on promises made, not from obligation, but choice. At the modest reception in the church hall, generations mingled and mended. Children from the foundation presented a handmade card signed by dozens of small hands. Employees from both companies shared stories of how truth had set them free from old rivalries. Later, as soft music played and the evening deepened, Zoe stood quietly observing the scene. She watched Carter laugh with her father over coffee, saw her mother and Evelyn planning a community garden project, noticed Ruth teaching foundation kids her secret cookie recipe. "Penny for your thoughts?" Carter's voice was warm as he joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. Zoe leaned into him, marveling at how natural it felt now. "I was just thinking about that night in your office, when you gave me 24 hours to decide the fate of my family. I was so angry then," he admitted. "I thought making you suffer would heal my pain. And instead you showed me that healing comes from choosing to break the cycle." He turned her to face him. "You could have exposed everything that first night, but you chose to carry the burden until truth could heal instead of destroy." Zoe touched his face gently. "I married you to save my family. I never imagined it would help. Heal yours, too. Help heal generations of pain we didn't even know we carried." Around them, the gathering continued, a living testament to restoration. Former rivals shared dessert plates, children darted between tables, and elderly church members blessed everyone within reach. Carter took her hand, his thumb brushing over her rings, the expensive one from their first ceremony, now paired with a simple band that meant infinitely more. "Ready to build a future on truth instead of fear?" "With you?" Zoe smiled, feeling the warmth of faith restored and love redeemed. "Always." The evening light softened to purple dusk outside the church windows, but inside, the glow of healing and hope illuminated faces old and young. Where there had been division, now stood unity. Where fear had ruled, love now reigned. And in the center of it all, two people who had learned that the greatest journey isn't the path to success, but the road to redemption. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.